you can communicate as you want. The message can go out there, but
Yeah.
you really have to work out the ground. The ground is about different things. It's about culture. It's about our diversity. It's about many things. It's about regions. About knowledge systems. You have to learn from the perspective of those you want to help.
Hello there, I'm Sarah McCluskey, and this is Research Adjacent. Each episode, I talk to amazing research adjacent professionals about what they do and why it makes a difference. Keep listening to find out why we think the research adjacent space is where the real magic happens. So, before I introduce today's guest, I just wanted to take a moment to mark the fact that this is the 10th episode of the podcast. This might not seem super dramatic, but it's a goal I set myself when I started. I'd heard that of the 4 million podcasts out there, more than 80% fail or pod fade before making it to 10 episodes. So I decided to commit to 10 episodes and see how it went. In fact, it's gone so much better than I expected or feared. And I've been really touched by how many of you have gotten in touch to say that you're enjoying it or that you've shared an episode with your networks. The whole idea of being research adjacent seems to have resonated too, so perhaps this really is the beginnings of a movement and not just some random brain fart. So, having made it to 10 episodes, I'm going to keep going for now anyway. I've got the next 5 episodes recorded for starters, and I'm also starting to think about how the podcast might evolve over time, and I'd love your thoughts on that. Are there any guests that you would like to hear from, or topics that you'd like me to cover? You can contact me via the podcast website, which is researchadjacent.com, via Twitter or LinkedIn. I'll put the links in the show notes. And it would also be amazing if you could help to spread the word about the podcast by leaving a review or telling your research adjacent friends all about it. I always knew that you research adjacent folks were the best, but you have proved it, and for that, I thank you. So, on to today's guest. Abraham Mamela is my first international guest. Based in Botswana, he's currently working as a communications consultant coordinator for the Alliance for Africa Partnership. He was recommended for the podcast by Faye Watson of episode 8 fame, who met Abraham when he was in the UK as an intern and then engagement fellow for the Wellcome Trust. As you'll hear, this time at Wellcome, as well as his time on a development programme with Research Africa, has really shaped the way that he thinks about science communication and engagement. We talk about some of the projects that he's worked on, as well as the sometimes stark differences between doing this work in the UK and in Africa. Occasionally the sound quality drops off, but frankly I think it's amazing that I was even on a video call to Botswana in the first place. Thank you, science. So I do hope you'll forgive us. Anyway, listen on. I wonder if we could start by just asking you to tell us a bit about what you do and how you got into that work.
Thank you so much, Sarah, for having me. Thank you for reaching out and whatever that we can do as a community of communicators and engagers, I'm happy to contribute. Well, first of all, let me just start by saying my name is Abraham Mamela. I'm a science communications and engagement practitioner. But just to give you a background about myself, a couple of about 12 years ago, I was working for Ministry of Foreign Affairs at the time, and I saw a job posting from the university, and I applied. And that post was about that vacancy was looking for a communications person who is, just look out there to come and write articles, communicate, be a connector between the university the researchers and the journalists, the usual. So that's where it began. And upon that, I started working for this Office of Research and Development at the University of Botswana at the time. And it was funded by the EU, EU project, and it was an ACP project. I worked with, started, you can imagine being, the communications person specifically for research. And your job is simply to go out there to speak to journalists, to give them stories. It was quite hard. I mean, I must say it was hard and not easy, most especially coming from the perspective of communications, general communications, and media understanding. So I started engaging with researchers across the university, So be it engineering, business, agriculture, whatever you name it. It was quite interesting for me. I was learning a lot. And from attending, if you can imagine, attending all workshops in the university, and you learn every day,
Yeah.
you open and you meet people, and before you interview them, you have to research a bit. So I got to be grounded from that background of at least understanding the different disciplines, from science to business to humanities, and also understanding the concept of science itself as a philosophy, as a pursuit of knowledge, and the politics of, what is science and what is not.
Yeah.
So, and from there, I got, while I was doing it, realizing that there was inadequacy within myself as an individual. I applied for an opportunity to train me as a science communicator through an organization called Research Africa. The challenge there, the challenge came upon when I was relating to journalists. Journalists were not really interested in the content that I was giving them, even though that this is important. How come it's not taken seriously? This changed life. This is the innovation, really.
Yeah.
So, but then for some reason something was not adding up. How come it's not really out there? How come policymakers are not taking it up immediately? When you hear of something that is a groundbreaking research, under normal circumstances, policymakers should be running at your doorstep, falling to get that research to say, how can we help people? Researchers should be excited by that, but that was not the case. Of course, there are so many things that I got to learn. It had to do with the technicality of the subject area, so many things about the industry itself, not making money. You realize people have to do things what benefits them, including
Yeah.
policymakers. You have to satisfy them to look, and what satisfies politicians and policymakers is different from what satisfies researchers. So yeah, I had to go for training to learn more about this, and then I started meeting people in the field and all that. But to cut my short story, here I am. I found myself at some point interning at the Wellcome, where I
Yeah.
spent a couple of times learning and meeting the global network, really, and also after that applying for a bit of grants to experiment on some of the works or ideas that I had at the time. So of course it came with challenges, and yeah, I'm all willing to share with you on this.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh, brilliant. That's a really great introduction. Thank you. So you said, I think probably a lot of people listening to this podcast will know about Wellcome Trust. So how did you come to be doing the Public Engagement Fellowship?
it was really luck. I must say, I was really lucky
Yeah.
to come across Wellcome, because if I remember, part of the program that I applied for at Research Africa to be trained as a science communications person was funded by IDRC, which are a Canadian-based organization,
Right.
to really improve the communication of science in the continent, in Africa. Part of it allowed me to spend some time in the UK with a reputable organization who've been doing this for a while, so that I can kind of, learn by doing, see how they do things, and then apply it and open my mind to what I was being trained for. And it really did that. It really opened my mind, and I really learned a lot through it. And then I remember one of my previous bosses at the time said, I know someone at the Wellcome. Since we are paying for this, I can speak to them and see if they will be willing to take you as their intern.
Yeah.
So we sat down and wrote an email, and then we got an immediate response, luckily. So I was asked at the time, and I remember I didn't know much about engagement, but I knew a lot about science communication, which came to me, time it was more coming from about distribution of content, information,
Yeah.
simplifying it. I remember there was a colleague. This is a really good friend of mine that now she asked, "Are you interested in communication, science communication part at the Wellcome, or are you interested in engagement?" And I was like, oh, before I respond, wait a minute, let me think about this, you know. And I thought, you know what? I know communication. I've been doing this communication thing for a while, and I've been trained into it. It would be maybe interesting to learn something new,
Yeah.
and then my answer was like engagement.
Yeah.
And then I was placed, at the Wellcome Engagement Unit, where it was really interesting. I met really interesting colleagues. You can imagine being at the Wellcome, you get exposed to like hundreds of global projects who are,
Yeah.
applying for that, and then you get to review some of the projects. You get to read some of these interesting ideas. So to me, I was like in a candy shop.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, fantastic. And did that sort of change your thinking then around where you've said, before that you were really about communication? Did that start to make you
Mhm.
think about shifting more into engagement?
Yes, yes, absolutely. Because, it got to me, I started learning that, look, engagement is more like, you know, you can communicate as you want. The message can go out there, but
Yeah.
you really have to work out the ground. The ground is about different things. It's about culture. It's about our diversity. It's about many things. It's about regions. About knowledge systems. Why do you have to learn from the perspective of those you want to help? You have to be exploring. When they say if you want to learn about ant, you have to be an ant yourself.
Mm.
Engagement was about being an ant, understanding what really engages, what really makes it tick
Yeah.
for those you want to help, for those who you want this content to reach out, and what's in it for them at the same time. Earlier on, I spoke about policymakers or business people. Why is it that in some countries some things work and in other countries don't work? What is it? What's the difference between most African countries and the Western communities? The advanced communities. The economies that are doing it, that are using science as a benefit. So
Mm-hmm.
I got to learn that it's really about diving it. It's not just about content. It's about where the content is landing.
Yeah.
What is interesting from their perspective, and how can meeting each other halfway, and if we are to advance science in the society, we are working against many things.
Mm-hmm.
So I got to learn that. And again, coming across the Wellcome gave me a global experience, really, of looking things from a global perspective, not only from my society's perspective, but it gave me an opportunity to learn that, okay, now, if we have to do this, we have to think about the difference from where the support is coming from, and you have to be moving many parts. You have to understand the many moving parts about science, which is why I believe at some point we are stuck in the lower middle income countries. So it exposed me to that perspective of understanding that yes, the two go together, communication and engagement. You cannot effectively communicate without really engaging. So they have to piggyback off each other. There has to be that symbiotic relationship.
Yeah.
So yeah, I got to learn that. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, fantastic. Sounds like a great experience. And thinking then about the other experiences or other things you've done, you mentioned you worked on quite a lot of different projects. Are there any particular things that stand out that you're really proud of?
Yes. Well, I must say the first project that I did when I left the UK, I applied for a Wellcome engagement project.
Mm-hmm.
That was when they still had engagement initiatives back then. So that was my project that is really with my heart right now, because at the time I was young,
Yeah.
and I was just amazed by how things could be so hard back at home. Yet in some countries, you can just literally go out there as long as you have a good idea, as long as you put your heart on the table. as long as you express yourself and you show what you stand for, there are people who are able to support you. At the time I was young, really ambitious, wanted to experiment a lot of things. And then I thought, what, let me start. There's this ongoing project back at home, which was with the Baylor Pediatric Clinic. It was a genomics project. And I approached a local organization called the Baylor Children's Clinic here, who is doing a sequencing project across the country and being part of a larger network called the H3 Africa project, where they were sequencing the genetics of Africans with the knowledge that, there's, when it comes to sequencing genetics in Western countries, more especially Caucasian countries, they had that data, but in Africa, the genetics is quite varied. There's so much. The diversity is large, but yet there's none. There's no data.
Really? Yeah.
So yes, so the H Africa was about that. So I approached the organization and said, look, can we work together in this? I'll do the funding. I've established a connection. I have an idea. I want to do this. At least I know some people who I can apply to and then can give funds, which was the Wellcome. And I think they were mainly funded by the NIH from the US at the time. So they agreed to what I was saying. And then we went for it. We applied for the grant and we got the grant. So the idea was to do comic books, which was using comic books to explore how we could, engage young adults, communities, to understand the relationship between health and genetics and genomic study. Yeah. So I thought, perhaps if you look at this from, if you use comics, it can be an exciting way and a way to really unpack things. So we did that and we explored things around what was similar, and there was nothing there. And the only thing that we came across was something that was like some elements that we kind of borrowed from, like similar to the Magic School Bus. But then in terms of the continent, who has done that before? No one has done that before. So it was really my first. So I had to do it. And surprisingly to date, Genome Ventures is still a project that I get to be contacted for, to say, can we come and talk about this project? Tell us how you did it. So I'm proud of that project.
Fantastic. Are there any pictures of the comics, or do they exist somewhere that people could see them?
Yes, I think if you go to the website for the Baylor Pediatric Children's Clinic website, there's a section just for that, and it's about, we publish about 4 series of comic books, and they were published into about 10 different languages across the continent, from Arabic to French to Portuguese to local languages to English to local languages in Uganda, Eswatini in Nigeria. So it was really a project that I still look back and I feel really proud of.
Oh, fantastic. Yeah. Well, we'll see if we can get a link to that and put it in the show notes.
Yeah. Through this project, we are able to bring together different people who are never really thought to be together, people who are really never thought, these people could work together. I brought doctors, biomedical scientists, young people, teenagers and young adults. We brought, even policymakers to some section, and it was all, even the conception of it and the development of the scripts were all about, it was very, very consultative. Of course, even though if I should ask, I'll do it differently, of course, this time around with a lot of experience. But at the time, I think I was 27 or 28.
Yeah.
It really brought this diversity of people to work together. The cross-pollination of ideas was really amazing and different. Yeah, so it was really something that one could look at and say, even to date, if you had to revisit the project, it would still work.
Yeah.
After that, I got an award by the Wellcome, which was a fellow for engagement,
Mm-hmm.
an engagement fellow. So that is also one of the landmarks that I could look back and be proud of,
Yeah.
because I was assigned mentors, to work, to do stuff and explore ecosystem, how they work, so how ecosystems work and the role of engagement there. So it's really something that really opened my eyes in terms of how ecosystems work. And usually, and this was common and it's still common, or let's talk about ecosystems. Usually the discussions, if you pay attention, is always discussed from the perspective of how many PhDs,
Yeah.
or the human development or human resources perspective. Right now, if you speak of Africa being becoming a knowledge-driven economy, where everything is done through intellect or
Mm-hmm.
innovation, you may know that right now the continent is mainly pushed by the availability of mines. If you go to whether it's DRC, whether it's Botswana, whether
Yeah.
it's South Africa, whether it's wherever, it's either a lot of economies are sustained by either the mines
Mm-hmm.
or agriculture doing the planting and sending
Yeah.
out all of that food somewhere, or even though they're producing, there's lack of inadequate knowledge into coming innovative ways of doing value creation for the
Yeah.
products that we have. If you take an example of Ghana, there's a lot of cocoa
Mm-hmm.
coming from Ghana, but then there isn't enough expertise or enough science to help us advance Ghana to a point where it could create value. I mean, I'm talking to a point where, a few years back, I think now they're doing something where it could create value from the cocoa they have,
Yeah.
and many other things, like usually digitalization to do many things. I mean, of course, young people are pushing and they are pushing, these things are coming up, but then the science is not there.
Mm.
It's happening in the private sector, the science is not there. Policy is happening, science is not. It's
Yeah.
only a few that, So now the ecosystems the ecosystem dialogue or conversations that are ongoing at the moment, they're mostly about human resources. And I'm speaking from the perspective of my experiences with the science community.
Mm-hmm.
When they talk ecosystems, it's mostly about PhDs.
Yeah.
We should have more PhDs, which is fine. I mean, it's true, we should have more PhDs. Or the number of facilities is still correct. The
Yeah.
number of facilities we should create, number of labs we should create, the infrastructure. And it's spoken mostly from those two perspectives, but with less emphasis on another aspect, which is the cohesion or the culture. And that is limiting, the biggest limiting factor, stopping our progression in the science community to advance itself. And I'll give you an example. Say, for instance, right now, there are so many researches that are done in Africa.
Yeah.
And a lot of this work is funded from outside, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is, I mean, we appreciate that. We appreciate that. That is actually good. It's giving us that experience, and it's funded from outside. And the expertise is funded from the outside. And what has been happening in the past has been that you've seen a lot of researchers coming in and going out, doing the
Yeah.
publishing and going back, doing publishing and going back. We've seen a lot of pharmaceuticals coming in, developing whatever, and then leaving.
Yeah.
But we've seen less of the benefit to the ground. Yes, you hear a lot of people saying, you know what, whatever the science that we're doing is going to benefit people in so many years. But the reality is, look, if you're doing a vaccine study in Africa, it's likely to immediately benefit the pharmaceutical companies.
Yeah.
The person you are interviewing cannot connect, the importance of you interviewing them and them being part of your project to, anything that puts the food on their table,
Yeah.
anything that hits them on the pocket, that changes their life right there. And by the time the vaccine comes, it's expensive. Secondly, it will come many, many years ago many, many years to come
Yeah.
when that person is no longer there. So that is one aspect of it. The other aspect is now you have to think in terms of the social cohesion, the connection, the culture.
Mm-hmm.
We need to admit that the same scientists who are coming outside a lot, and I'm beginning to see a change recently, of course, with a lot of ethical bodies saying, you know what, if you're working in Africa, we want to see evidence that you have consulted with the authorities.
Yeah.
We want to see evidence that you have done, there is enough benefit. It's clear. The movement of data is very clear. And the acknowledgement of those who are on the ground is very clear. Like there's a data that shows that when it comes to, there's a serious disproportion of knowledge representation and knowledge production when it comes to Africa. But how is that possible? There has been, for many decades, there has been a lot of research work done in the continent, and people have been publishing. Who owns those? You know,
Yeah.
when we are doing that, are you considering working with local researchers?
Yeah.
Are you considering working with the real communities? So that is one aspect, and to me, that is one aspect that is missing, which is now understanding the ground and also acknowledging the ground. So now, when it comes to knowledge system, we need to accept that we are different and then acknowledge it and begin to recognize it and begin to work towards that. And it can only happen for us to advance science. It can only happen if we work with those on the ground, with the communities, with those who own the knowledge systems. I'll give you an example. You know, democracy, say from the West perspective, is a different perspective, and that it's been within the political sphere and it's known. Now, say for instance, you come up with a research hypothesis and you want to work on solving HIV in the continent or elsewhere in a developing country or a lower middle income country.
Yeah.
The perception of that disease that you want to solve is mainly understood from the perspective of those who've been dealing with the disease for many years. Let's say for instance Ebola.
Yeah.
Say for instance Ebola or malaria. If you go to communities and say, look, stop eating, they call it bushmeat, so that you stop spreading Ebola.
Yeah.
You are working against the tide.
Yeah.
But rather, if you explore ways in which you have to say, look, we have a problem. Shall we co-create a solution that can help us deal with how we eat bushmeat safely, such that the problem that we create, it's also intertwining and infusing the science and the culture.
Yeah.
Otherwise, if you bring in the science, it will work against the culture, or it will be resistance against the culture. And the culture will push back because guess what? The culture is where the majority are.
Yeah.
The culture is where the tacit knowledge and people who do things as per what they know are.
Yeah.
So the innovation can be perfect sometimes. It's the landing ground where the innovation is landing. So I usually equate that to saying, are we designing airplanes that have to land somewhere, or are we designing airplanes that have to land on the ground? So we have to design the landing ground, which is the social cohesion and the culture. So when we come up with an innovation, we should actually come up with a solution that would bridge the gap or narrow the gap between the culture and the science. So we need to consult the stakeholders of culture and stakeholders of science constantly, such that we co-create a solution. And it will be easier also to bring stakeholders of policy, stakeholders of business to this, to the conversation. So it's that I feel when we talk about the ecosystem, we forget to emphasize on. If you look at most research funders, and of course, I'm seeing the trend is changing a bit with certain funders, most especially in the UK.
Yeah.
Mostly funders from the UK have begun to notice that to a point where every time a researcher makes an application, they say, we want to see community engagement plan. We want to see how you're going to engage the local. That's changing. But that is one country that is a bit ahead. I've been to other continents and other funders. It's not the case.
Right.
It's still new and it's not happening.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And even in the UK, I think it's a work in progress. I think we still have
Yes.
some of the same challenges. Definitely have a lot of the same challenges here. It just feels that the stakes are not as high. I think the stakes are higher, probably, for you in Africa than they are here in the UK. It matters more to get it right.
Yeah. No, you are definitely right. And I mean, the UK may be ahead of everyone, but it doesn't mean that they're ahead anywhere far.
Yeah.
I've been,
I think that we should probably think about wrapping up this conversation now. So I wonder if just a couple of other questions for you. Is there anybody else who is doing great work in your area, perhaps other people in Africa, that you would like to give a shout out to?
Yeah, I've come across a couple, but in my country here, there are not many. I've come
No.
across one or two. I know Thabiso Mashaba is doing a great job on the ground, and I've recently learned of Khame Bansi is doing some work on climate change.
Mm.
There are other colleagues who I've met recently. I know of Tasha from Cape Town.
Mm-hmm.
I know of Abrams from Cape Town as well.
Yeah.
I know of Nabil from Cape Town. And I know Sarah from India. I know a lot from the UK.
Yeah.
So I know of Rod from Malawi. I know of Waku from Malawi. And so a couple of our colleagues in the space.
Great.
But we have a long way because there are young ones who are coming up and there has to be that progression.
Yeah. Yeah. Always changing.
Yeah.
And
Always
finally,
changing.
if people want to get in touch with you, whereabouts can they find you?
Well, you can reach out to my email, abraham.mamela@gmail.com.
Yeah.
Or I still have my another email, abraham@inversegroup.com is still active, abraham@inversegroup.com. And I'm there on LinkedIn. I'm also there on different platforms, Facebook, Abraham Mamela, Twitter.
Yep.
It's AC Mamela AC Mamela. It's my handle.
Great.
So do please, if you want to reach out, do reach me out through those channels.
Great. I'll get the links as well and put them in the show notes. So it just remains to say thank you so much for having a chat today. It's been really interesting.
Thank you so much for reaching out, Sarah.
Thanks for listening to Research Adjacent. You can find show notes and other episodes at researchadjacent.com. I would absolutely love to hear what you think of the show, so please get in touch. You can drop us a message via researchadjacent.com or find us on social media at resadjacent. And if you've enjoyed the show, please think about sharing it, subscribing or leaving a review so that other people can find us too. Research Adjacent is presented and produced by Sarah McCluskey, and you, yes you, get a big gold star for listening right to the end. See you next time.